I remember my little brother's body shaking like a fragile leaf as I held him tight under that old bed, covering his tiny ears so he wouldn't hear those dreadful screams coming from the next room. In that very moment, I came to understand that hell wasn't down in the ground. Just like Pastor Reynolds said in Sunday service, it was right there in our own home, our house. My name is Eleanor Ellie Harris. But everyone here in Cedar Grove, that forgotten corner of rural Tennessee, knew me as Miss Ellie, the doll lady. I was 87 years old back then, with hair as thin and white as cotton candy, and my hands all twisted up from arthritis, from years of making cloth dolls to sell at the county fairs. I was just curious, wondering where all you folks watching this are from on this beautiful planet of ours. I'd love to read your comments. Before we go on, why don't you subscribe to the channel and like this video? It really helps our Grandparents Tales group bring you new videos every day, and lets more women hear our voices and find some courage. I was born in 1938, in a simple but tidy little house on the outskirts of town. Our home wasn't anything special, but my father, William Harris, always made sure everything was clean and in order. Even though he only earned a little from working in the coal mines that put our town on the map, every day he'd leave early with the lunchbox I'd packed for him since I was 9. And he wouldn't come back until the sun had set behind those hills. He'd come home covered in black dust, his eyes red from the cold grit, but always with a smile on his lips, and a little gift for my brother Benny, who was 5 years younger than me. "Look what Daddy brought you, Benny," he'd say, pulling out a wooden car he'd carved on his brakes, or a piece of candy he'd saved up for by skipping his tobacco. He was just too good for this cruel world we lived in. My mother, Vivian, was what folks called a modern woman back then. She was beautiful enough to make your eyes ache, but it was a dangerous beauty that drove men wild and made women purse their lips. She always kept her dark curls perfect, her waist cinched even tighter with those corsets, and the way she walked turned every man's head as she passed by. While Dad worked like a condemned man in those scorching mines, Mother was always making up excuses around town. "I'm helping with the church fair. I'm visiting a sick friend. I need to run to the general store for sewing thread," and off she'd go, all dolled up with bright red lipstick. Oh, everyone knew you didn't need lipstick for church or visiting a friend. But Dad never questioned her. He'd come home so exhausted he could barely eat what I'd warmed up from lunch. If we had anything at all, then he'd bathe in the tub to wash off that black dust and fall into bed, often before she even returned. And when she did come back, she'd smell of fancy cigarettes, the kind decent women wouldn't even know, her breath sweet with liquor, and sometimes marks on her neck that she'd cover with powder or a colorful scarf the next day. "Oh, just mosquito bites," she'd say. "Don't you go getting curious now." She'd tell me when I was 12 and eyeing those bruises suspiciously. The worst part wasn't the outright lies. It was seeing Dad pretend to believe them, hanging his head like he was the one who'd done wrong. Where's your mother been? Ellie, he'd ask sometimes, sitting on the front porch steps, rolling a cigarette. She went to the pharmacy for headache medicine. I'd lee, repeating what she'd told me to say before she left. He'd just shake his head, take a deep drag, and blow out smoke that seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. Oh, how I hated lying to my father. The man who never denied me anything, who'd come home dead tired and still find the energy to help with my homework. Tell Benny a bedtime story. But Mother had made it clear what would happen if I spoke up. If your father finds out the truth, he'll leave you, Ellie, and you'll lose him. Is that what you want? Are you scared of losing your dad? I kept quiet. Looking back now, I see that was my first big mistake. My silence, out of fear, ended up costing more than I could have imagined back then. She was gone more often, and for longer stretches. Sometimes she'd be away for 2 or 3 days, and come back like she'd just stepped out to the corner store for bread. I had to help my cousin with her new baby. I stayed at my friend's because she was sick. And when those days lined up with the county fair coming to town, or some handsome traveling salesman staying at Mrs. Dorothy's boarding house, well, of course, it was all just coincidence. Meanwhile, life at home was me trying to keep everything smooth. At 13, I was cooking, washing, running, taking care of Benny like it was my own duty. Dad tried to help on weekends, but the mine work wore him down so much he could barely lift his arms on Sundays. Still, he'd get us to church, all clean and proper, like he wanted the whole town to see we were a respectable family. Despite the whispers about Mother, around that time, I noticed something odd with Benny, my brother, who was always so cheerful and chatty, started getting quiet and scared. He wouldn't play with the other boys after school. He'd hide under the bed at the sound of footsteps. And he even started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was little. What's wrong, Benny? Is someone bullying you at school? I asked one night while helping Dad change the wet sheets before he noticed. He just shook his head, his little eyes full of fear. But he wouldn't say a word. I figured it was some schoolyard bully, like usual. But the worst was yet to come. And me, with the innocence of a young girl, I couldn't even imagine the horror happening right under our own roof. If you followed me this far, if you could leave a comment saying where you're watching from. It gives me strength knowing someone's listening after keeping this story bottled up for so many years. And, if you could, leave a like, so this account reaches more people who might need to know you can survive even the worst nightmares. Things at home just kept getting worse, like water slowly heating up until it boils, and you don't even notice. Dad was getting thinner, more hunched over, not just from the hard work, but from the weight of pretending not to see what was going on. Benny was quieter, more frightened, curling up in corners like a wounded animal. And Mother, when she was home, treated Dad like he was just a nuisance. An old piece of furniture you had to step around. William, go get me some cigarettes. She'd order as soon as he sat down to rest after work. But, Vivian, I'm just home. "My legs are so heavy," he'd reply weakly. "If your legs are that heavy, how do you walk around the mine all day? Go on. Don't be lazy." And he'd go, dragging his tired feet to Mr. Wilson's general store just to please that woman who didn't deserve his hard-earned sweat. One night, Dad had to go to Chattanooga to pick up some new tools for the mine and stay overnight. Naturally, Mother took the chance and left, saying she was going to prayer meeting, all perfumed up and in a new dress. I was home watching Benny, who wouldn't eat properly, just staring at the door in fear. "Will she come back, Ellie?" he asked, trembling as I finished cleaning the kitchen. "Yes. But later. Let's go to bed. We have school tomorrow," I answered, trying to sound calm, even though I knew she probably wouldn't be back till morning. That night, I woke up to a strange noise. At first, one thought it was some animal on the roof. But as I listened closer, I realized it was crying. The muffled sobs of my brother coming from his little room. I got up worried, thinking he was having nightmares again. When I opened his door, the moonlight through the window showed a sight that made my blood run cold. Mother was sitting on Benny's bed, one hand over his mouth, and the other, oh, it's so hard to even say this after all these years, doing things a mother should never do to a child. I stood frozen in the doorway. Couldn't scream, couldn't move. She was the first to see me. Her eyes glazed over, reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. "What are you staring at? Girl, get back to your room and don't you breathe a word to anyone. Do you hear me? No one's going to believe you anyway." It hit me like a bucket of ice water. Suddenly, everything made sense. Benny's fear, the nightmares, the terror when she'd come home at night. How long had this been going on right under my nose? How long had my little brother suffered in silence while I slept just a few steps away? That night changed everything inside me. Like something shattered. A piece of glass that could never be put back together. Shaking like a leaf. I turned back to my room and locked the door, pushing the wardrobe in front of it. I couldn't sleep. My heart pounding like a drum at a revival meeting. Tears streaming non-stop. How could a mother do that to her own? The next morning, as the sun peeked through the window, I heard her leave the house, slamming the door, probably off to meet one of those men she called friends. Only then did I have the courage to leave my room. I went straight to Benny's little room and saw him curled up under the bed, staring into nothing like he'd seen the devil himself. "Come here, little brother," I said, reaching out, trying not to show the horror still racing through my veins. "Come on, let's have some breakfast and then head to school." Benny slowly crawled out, his little eyes swollen from crying, his pajamas wrinkled and damp. Without a word, he came to me, clutched my dress, and started sobbing. "Since when?" "Benny," I asked gently, stroking the hair I'd cut with sewing scissors, "since when has Mother been doing this to you?" "For a long time, Ellie," he answered in that heartbreaking whisper. "It started when I had a high fever and Dad had to sleep in town to get medicine. Oh Lord, that was almost 2 years ago. For 2 years, my little brother had endured this in silence while I slept just a room away. For 2 years, that woman, who didn't deserve to be called a mother, had done those terrible things to a child who couldn't defend himself. Why hadn't Benny told me before? She said she'd send me to an orphanage if I told, that neither Dad nor you would believe me, that I'd be making it up. He said he'd beat me until I couldn't sit. The cruelty of those threats choked me. How could anyone treat a defenseless child and their own son that way? Right then, a wave of hate rose in me so strong I hardly recognized myself. Me, the good girl who never raised her voice, now thinking only of how to make that woman pay for what she'd done. Benny, listen to me carefully, I said, holding his small hands tight. She lied. Dad would never think you're making it up. Would never beat you or send you to any orphanage. Our father is a good man. A real man who loves us more than anything in this world. And I love you, little brother. And I'll protect you no matter what. He looked at me with those big sad eyes, like he wanted to believe but was afraid to hope. Promise me, Ellie. Promise you won't let her do it again. I promise, Benny, on the light in your eyes. I promise she won't ever touch you again. That day, I kept Benny home from school. I bathed him, made his favorite cornmeal porridge with milk, and spent the day telling stories, trying to make him smile again. But it seemed like a part of my brother was torn away, an innocence that would never come back. In the days after, I didn't let Benny out of my sight for a minute. Wherever I went, I took him with me at bedtime. I put his mattress in my room and locked the door with the key I secretly took from the storage room. When Mother came home, usually in the middle of the night or after days away, I'd pretend to sleep and quote. My eyes were open, with a broom handle under the bed, ready to protect my brother if I had to. Of course, Dad noticed something had changed. He too saw Benny wouldn't leave my side, that I locked the bedroom door at night, that I tensed up every time Mother got near him. What's going on, Ellie? He asked one night while I was washing dishes. Benny was already in bed. Mother had gone out, saying she was going to as a tool, and it was just the two of us in that small kitchen lit by our oil lamp. I almost told him everything right then. The words were on the tip of my tongue. But what if she was right? What if he didn't believe me? Worse, what if he did but didn't have the courage and Suwana to face her nothing? Dad, Benny's just having nightmares, so I'm letting him sleep with me. He looked at me with those tired eyes that seemed to see right through me. He placed his calloused hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. When you're ready to tell the truth, Ellie, I'll be here. Those words echoed in my head for days. I wanted so badly to trust him, to spill it all, to share that terrible burden weighing me down. But fear, fear is a nasty beast that gnaws at you from inside, making you doubt even what you know is true. Meanwhile, Mother seemed to lose control more and more. Her outings got longer. She'd come back drunker, Miss Ye. Sometimes she'd bring expensive gifts she could never afford on the little money Dad gave her for groceries. A new hat, a bottle of French perfume, a pearl necklace she swore was a gift from the lady she claimed to be housekeeping for. Dad pretended to believe it, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, the sadness turning into something harder, colder. He wasn't a fool. The neighbors' nasty comments had reached him, the pitying looks from the other men at the mine, the whispers that stopped when he walked by. One night, he came home earlier than usual. That wasn't normal. He always got back after sundown, but that day, around 4 o'clock, I heard his footsteps on the porch. I was in the kitchen preparing beans for dinner, and Benny was playing with the wooden cars Dad had made him. When he walked in, I knew something was wrong. His face was paler, his eyes more sunken. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice firmer than usual. "She left about 2 hours ago," I said, telling him she went to the pharmacy for headache medicine. He let out a humorless laugh. He went to the bedroom and came back with a small wooden box he kept under the bed. He opened it and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Do you know what this is?" "Ellie, it's our life savings. Every penny I scraped together hurt my back under that sum. It was for a better house for us, for education for Benny, for you." My heart sank. I knew where this was going, but now it's just this. He pointed to the crumpled bills inside, less than half of what was there. I remembered the last time he opened that box, about 6 months ago. The rest was gone, a little each week. Thinking I wouldn't notice, I didn't know what to say. It was another piece of the destruction Mother had pieced together over the years. "It's not your fault, my girl. Never your fault." He put the money back in the envelope and closed the box. "I just need you to watch Benny today. I'll handle some business in town." Something in his voice made me afraid. It was the voice of a man who'd made a hard decision after years of suffering. For the first time, I saw in my father not the submissive man people thought, but someone who'd endured more than anyone for his children. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you about Mother and Benny." He stopped at the door, hand on the knob. He turned slowly, eyes fixed on me. "About Mother and Benny." I took a deep breath. It was now or never. The words started spilling out slowly at first, then like a flood I couldn't control. I told him everything I'd seen that night, what Benny had told me, the 2 years of abuse my brother had suffered in silence. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I spoke, but I kept my voice steady because the truth needed to be said, no matter how painful. When I finished, I expected shock, disbelief, even anger on my father's face. But what I saw was different, a scary calm, like the quiet before the fiercest storm. His eyes, always gentle, had darkened, and his hands, which had never been raised against anyone, were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. "How long have you known about this?" "Ellie, for 2 weeks. Dead. I wanted to tell you before, but I was scared you wouldn't believe me, or that you..." "Oh," my father's face. But what I saw was so different. You know, a terrifying kind of calm, like the stillness before the fiercest storm. His eyes, always so gentle, they had darkened, and his hands, oh Tempsis, they never once raised to anyone before, clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white as could be. He asked me, "How long have you known about this, Ellie?" And I said, "For 2 weeks, Dad. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, or that you couldn't do anything, or that I was too weak to protect my own children. Shame just burned inside me." That's exactly what I was thinking. Forgive me, Dad. He came to me, hugged me tight, then knelt down to Benny's level, who had hidden behind my skirt when I started crying. "My son," he said, his voice all choked up. "Shukrai, not even for Mother? Not even for her?" Benny asked weakly. "Especially not for her," Dad replied and walked out, slamming the door behind him. That night seemed endless. After Dad left, I locked every door and window as he'd instructed. I made Benny eat dinner, though he hardly touched it, and put him to bed early. I lay down beside him, stroking his hair until he fell asleep. But I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart in my throat, wondering what Dad might be doing. The hours crawled by like snails. Every sound outside made me jump. Every shadow at the window froze my blood. It must have been near midnight when I heard footsteps on the porch. They weren't Dad's steady steps, but the stumbling gait of Lair, someone who could barely stand. "Open up, Eleanor," Mother yelled in that slurred voice of a drunk. "I know you're in there, you naughty girl." I stood still as a statue, hand over my mouth to stay silent, praying Benny wouldn't wake. "Open this door right now, or I'll break it down," she went on, now pounding on the wood. "Who do you think you are, keeping me out of my own house?" For a moment, I feared she might actually do it. But then I heard another voice outside, a man's, not Dad's. "Come on, Vivian. Let's go to my place. You can fight this out with the kids tomorrow." It was Clarence, that fellow who'd been in town a few months, claiming to be a traveling salesman. But everyone knew he lived off gambling and shady deals. A slick-haired man with a phony smile, always with a toothpick in his mouth and an expensive cigar in hand. The silence that followed was broken by Mother's shrill laughter, then kisses and whispers I didn't want to understand. Then the footsteps faded away, and finally, nothing. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I knew it was just a temporary truce. She'd be back, and when she did, she'd be furious. So I just hoped Dad would get there first. I must have dozed off at some point, because I jolted awake to the sound of the front door opening, and I leapt out of bed, ready to yell, when I heard Dad's soft call, "Ellie, Benny, it's me." I ran barefoot down the hall and saw him, standing in the living room, face tired but with a relieved expression, like he'd lifted a weight off his shoulders. "Where were you?" Dad, I was so worried about settling what I should have long ago. My girl, he answered, taking off his hat and hanging it on the hook. Did Mother show up here? Yes, but not alone. She was with Clarence. That man from the store? He shook his head. Not surprised at all. Good thing. Tomorrow morning. I want both of you dressed neatly and packed with a few clothes. We're leaving this place. As I heard that... My heart froze completely. If you liked this video, don't forget to like it. The best is yet to come. Where are we going? Dad. To my sister's house in Knoxville. I talked to her on the store phone. They're waiting for us. There. We'll start a new life. Just the three of us. I didn't ask any more. The determination on his face said all I needed to know. I went back to the room where Benny was still, sleeping, oblivious to it all, and lay down trying to imagine what this new life would be like. The next morning, as the sun was just rising, the three of us were by the road waiting for Mr. Hank's truck that went to Knoxville once a week with goods, each with a small bundle. And Mother? Benny asked as the truck appeared around the bend, kicking up red dust. She's chosen a different path. Son, Dad answered firmly but not harshly. Sometimes in life, that's how it is. People choose different roads and can't walk together anymore. Of course, that wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for a 7-year-old to understand at the time. The rest he'd learn as he grew up. That some folks aren't meant to be mothers. That monsters can hide behind pretty faces. And sometimes love isn't enough to heal what's broken inside. As the truck pulled away from town, I looked back one last time. Our little house grew smaller in the distance until it was just a white speck surrounded by green. I didn't feel sad, not even nostalgic. What I felt was relief. Escaping a prisoner's bliss I'd been in for too long. What I didn't know was that we were leaving more than just a house. We were leaving the end of a nightmare and starting another story. One I'd only fully understand years later. The journey to Knoxville took nearly a day. Benny slept most of the way, his head on Dad's lap, rocking with the truck's bumps on the dirt road. I sat there watching the scenery change. The dry land gave way to greener fields. As we neared the river, it was getting dark. And Clara, Dad's sister whom I hardly knew, was waiting for us at her door. A simple but clean house on the outskirts of the city. She was an older woman, widowed for years, living alone since her only son moved to New York for work. William, my brother, she exclaimed, hugging him tight. Then she turned to us, her eyes lighting up with emotion. And here are my niece and nephew. You've grown so much. The last time I saw you, Eleanor was just a baby. And Benny wasn't even a thought. We were welcomed with clean beds, hot food on the table, and something we hadn't felt in a long time, peace. That first night, after so long, I slept without fearing the bedroom door would creak open in the middle of the night. In the weeks that followed, we settled into this new life. Dad got a job in construction. Better pay and not as grueling on his body. I started helping Aunt Clara with her jams that she sold at the market, learning recipes I still use today. Benny went to the local school and slowly became his cheerful self again. Though some invisible scars remained, it wasn't until a month later that I mustered the courage to ask Dad what really happened that night after he left. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner. Aunt Clara had turned in, and Benny was playing with the cars Dad made him. "Dad," I began hesitantly, "what did you do when you left that night after I told you about Mother and—" Benny, he was silent for a moment, staring at the stars twinkling in the night sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low, it was almost a whisper. "I went after the truth, Ellie. All of it that your mother was hiding first. I went to Miss Sally's place, the house at the end of town that everyone pretended didn't exist. I asked about her, and the girls there just laughed in my face. Mr. Harris, your wife doesn't work here. She comes to spend your money with the men she brings." It was like a slap in the face, but I kept going. Then I went to Clarence's house. That snake was always lurking behind your mother, even in front of me. With no respect for our family, he wasn't there. But a neighbor said he'd seen him and your mother leave together earlier, heading to the Central Hotel. The Central Hotel was the only one in town where outsiders stayed. Not a respectable place for a married woman. I went there. The desk clerk was a cousin of mine. He didn't stop me. I went up to the room and found your mother with him. I won't go into details because there's some things a daughter doesn't need to know about her mother. But I confronted her. I told her I knew everything. The affairs, the money she'd stolen, and especially what she'd done to Benny. He stopped. His voice choked with emotion and anger. She laughed. She laughed in my face and said I was too weak to do anything. That she always knew she could do whatever she wanted because I wouldn't have the guts to react. And Clarence, that coward, just stood there smirking from the corner like I was. And joke, even after all those years, that memory still stings. That's when I did what I should have done a long time ago. I pulled out the little recorder that Dr. Wilson's son had lent me. You remember him? The boy who liked playing reporter I had. Recorded it all. Her confession about Benny, the money, the men, everything. I couldn't believe it. I never thought my straightforward dad would plan something like that. I told her I'd take that recording to the sheriff, to the pastor, to the whole town if I had to. That she'd be arrested for what she'd done to Benny. That she'd lose everything. That everyone would see the monster behind. That pretty face. The way Dad said it, without yelling, without gesturing. Just with that cold, calculated certainty, showed me a side of him I'd never seen before. Did she believe you? I asked, holding my breath. She believed. For the first time, I saw fear in your mother's eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of what others would think, of what she'd lose. What scared her most was that everyone would see her true self. We made a deal right there. She'd stay with Clarence since that's what she wanted. And the three of us would disappear from town. She'd never look for us again. Never try to see me or Benny. In return, I wouldn't show the recording to anyone. And after all that, You still trusted her? No, Ellie. I didn't trust her. That's why I had to go as far as Aunt Clara's. Somewhere your mother didn't even know existed. And I left a copy of the recording with Dr. Wilson, sealed with instructions to open it, if anything happened to me or you two. That's when I understood my father. That quiet man everyone thought was meek had planned everything down to the last detail. Not for revenge, but for protection. To give us a chance at a new life. Away from the poison that had infiltrated our family. Is that why we never saw her again? I asked softly, feeling an immense relief knowing that chapter was truly closed. Yes, my girl. Your mother chose her path, and we chose ours. Some knots need to be untied when they start to choke. You, that night, lying in my new bed, smelling the flowers from Aunt Clara's soap on the sheets, I cried, not for the mother I lost, truth be told. I never really had one but for my father's quiet courage. The man who'd borne so much for us, and when the truth came, knew exactly what to do to save us. Our life in Knoxville flowed on like a river finding its natural course. After the rocks and rapids, the prison days turned to weeks, weeks to months. And before I knew it, a year had passed since we left Cedar Grove and all that horror behind. Dad worked steadily in construction and soon got promoted to foreman for his careful, responsible way with everything. Benny adapted well to his new school, made friends, got us good grades, and gradually became the chatty boy he was before it all. And I, at 14, helped Aunt Clara with her jams and went to school in the afternoons. We were piecing our lives back together, like someone mending. A broken mirror. The scars were invisible but there, especially for Benny, who sometimes woke up screaming in the night, sweating, cold, eyes wide with fear. In those moments, Dad would go in, sit on the edge of the bed, and just stay until he fell back asleep. His big, calloused hands stroking my brother's hair with a gentleness you wouldn't expect from a man that size. I thought we'd never hear from Mother again, that she'd vanished from our lives for good, just as Dad had arranged. But fate, that relentless weaver, had other plans. One Saturday afternoon, as we were coming back from the market after helping Aunt Clara sell her jams, we saw a strange young man standing at our door. He was a lanky fellow, about 20, in traveling clothes, holding an old suitcase. "Are you William Harris?" he asked as Dad approached. "I am. How can I help you?" Young man. "I'm Jeremy. Doctor. Wilson's son from Cedar Grove. My father sent me to deliver this to you personally." He handed Dad a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax. Dad took it, frowning in surprise. It had been over a year since we'd been in touch with anyone from the old town. "What's happened?" I asked, a chill in my stomach. "I don't know the details, Miss. Father just said it was urgent that Mr. Harris get this letter as soon as possible." Dad invited the young man in for coffee, but he declined, saying he needed to continue his journey that afternoon. After the young man left, the four of us, Aunt Clara, Dad, Benny, and I sat at the kitchen table as Dad carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Dr. Wilson's neat handwriting and a yellowed newspaper clipping. Dad read the letter in silence, his face growing paler. Then, without a word, he passed the clipping to us. It was a small news item, the kind that shows up in the corner of the page. Body of woman found on riverbank. The body of Vivian Adams Harris, Sanchersan, was found by local fishermen on the banks of the Cumberland River yesterday morning. According to the deputy sheriff in charge, the victim showed signs of beating, and the initial investigation indicates it was a crime of passion. Clarence Davies, who had a relationship with the victim, is a fugitive. I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me, even after all she'd done, all the harm she'd caused. Seeing the news of my mother's death printed there, cold and stark like that, took my breath away. I looked at Benny, who was only 8 and didn't fully grasp what was happening. Then at Dad, who was holding Dr. Wilson's letter with slightly trembling hands. "What happened to Mother?" Benny asked, his voice uncertain. Dad folded the newspaper back, read the news, and put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother's gone, son. She won't be coming back." That night, after Benny was asleep, Dad told me what was in Dr. Wilson's letter. According to him, after we left town, Mother and Clarence stayed together, blowing through the money Dad earned on gambling and shady deals. When the money ran out, they started fighting. She threatened to leave him. He wouldn't have it, from what witnesses said. On the night she disappeared, there were screams from their house. The next day, Clarence was gone from town. And 2 days later, the fisherman found her body. Dr. Wilson said the police are looking for Clarence, but he's probably crossed state lines into Tennessee, Dad explained, speaking softly so as not to wake my brother. "I also destroyed the recording I left with him, as per our agreement, in case something like this happened." I sat silent for a while, processing it all. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to cry for the mother I'd lost. Another part was angry for what she'd done, and the part that scared me most felt relief, knowing she could never hurt us again. "Is it our fault, Dad?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "If we hadn't left? If you hadn't made that deal with her?" "No, Ellie," he cut in firmly. "Gone missing." Folks heard screams coming from their house. The next day, Clarence had vanished from town, and 2 days later, the fisherman found her body. Dr. Wilson says the police are after Clarence, but he might have crossed state lines into Tennessee by now, Dad explained, speaking softly so as not to wake my little brother. He also said he'd destroyed that recording I left for him, just like we'd agreed, in case something like this happened. I sat there quiet for a moment, trying to make sense of it all. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to cry for the mother we lost. Another part felt angry for all she'd done. And then there was that other part, the one that scared me most, feeling a kind of relief, knowing she could never hurt us again. Was it our fault, Dad? I finally asked, my voice breaking. If we hadn't left, if you hadn't made that deal with her. No, Ellie, he cut in firmly, decisions they make. I thought about my mother. So beautiful but so rotten inside, who craved any man's attention over her own children's love. I thought about her fate. Abandoned and beaten by the very kind of man she always sought. Was that justice, not the kind Dad had planned? With the recording. His was clean, calculated justice for protection, not destruction. But maybe it was life's justice. That harsh judge who eventually collects from us all. Months passed. The news of Mother's death settled with each of us in our own way. Dad seemed lighter, like the final burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Benny, after a few nights of nightmares, finally started to heal his deepest wounds. Maybe instinctively. He knew he was truly safe now. It took me longer. There were so many mixed feelings inside me. Anna, sadness, guilt, relief, sometimes suffocating me. It was Aunt Clara who noticed my inner struggle and, with the wisdom of a woman who's seen a lot in life, called me aside for a talk. You know, Ellie, she said as we made caramel together. When my husband passed, I felt so many things at once that I thought I'd go mad, sad for the loss, angry that he left me alone, guilty for not seeing the illness sooner, and even relieved because those last months with him bedridden were torture for us both. What I learned is that all those feelings can exist together without one diminishing the other. You can be angry at your mother for what she did and still sad about the end she met. You can feel relieved knowing she won't hurt your brother again, and at the same time, feel guilty for that relief. Don't try to pick just one. Girl, we're not that simple. Her words were like sweet water in my desert of confusion. Gradually, I learned to live with that storm inside, to accept that I could feel contradictory things without it making me a bad person. One day, nearly a year after the news of Mother's death, Dad gathered us at the dinner table after the meal. He had that serious face he wore when he needed to tell us something important. I have some news, he began, looking at me first. Then Benny, I've been offered a job on a big construction project in Columbus. Good pay, company housing. And most importantly, it's a chance to start fresh in a big city, where no one knows us, where no shadows from the past can reach. Aunt Clara, sitting beside him, smiled sadly. I'll miss you all, but your father's right. Columbus is the future. You'll have better schools, more opportunities. And so, 2 months later, we said goodbye to Knoxville and Aunt Clara, promising to visit, and boarded the bus to Columbus, Ohio. Dad was right. It really was a new beginning. A big city full of colors, smells, and sounds so different from the rural places we'd known. Our house was in a company workers' neighborhood, small but clean and airy, with a view of the river in the distance. Compared to the places we'd known before, we were building our lives anew, piece by piece. Like mending a shattered mirror, the scars lingered. Especially for Benny, who occasionally woke up yelling in the night, drenched in cold sweat, eyes wide with terror. In those times, Dad would enter, sit on the bed's edge, and remain until sleep returned, his large, rough hands gently stroking my brother's hair with unexpected tenderness. I believed we'd left Mother behind forever, that she'd faded from our lives as Dad intended. But fate, that tireless weaver, had different designs. One Saturday afternoon, returning from the market after assisting Aunt Clara with her jam sales, we spotted a stranger, a young man, at our door. He was slender, around 20, dressed in travel attire, carrying an aged suitcase. "Are you William Harris?" he inquired as Dad drew near. "I am. How might I assist you?" "Azen, son of Dr. Wilson from Cedar Grove." That river was way off in the distance. "My father succeeded in his new job. You know, getting promoted to construction manager in just a few years. Benny grew up strong and hearty, showing such a knack for learning that made my father so proud. His talent for learning made my father so proud. And me? Well, besides keeping up with my studies, I started making cloth dolls to sell, using what I learned from Aunt Clara. But I put my own twist on them, from Aunt Clara, but with my own style. Right there in Columbus, I met Edward, a young man working as an electrician on the projects my father managed. He was a serious, hard-working fellow from a simple family, just like ours. A serious, hard-working man from a simple family like ours. We started courting when I was 17, always with my father's approval and watchful eye, as was the custom back then, back in those days. The day Edward proposed, my father took him aside for a talk on the porch. I was so worried, imagining what they might be saying, about what they might be saying. But when they came back, both had smiles on their faces. Your grandfather told me all about it later, Ellie. Then, when Edward and I were alone, he shared it with me, about your family, about what happened to your brother, about how you left town. He said, "You have a right to know what family you're joining." I felt frozen, my heart pounding like it might burst. Frozen, my heart pounding like it might burst. My father had never told that story to anyone outside the family. And now Edward knew everything. The shame, the horror, the scars we had to carry. The scars we had to carry. "And what do you think about that?" I asked, barely breathing. "I think your father is the most admirable man I've ever met," he replied without a moment's hesitation. "I think you and your brother are survivors, warriors, and I'm even prouder that you'll be my wife. We got married in the spring of 1957 in a simple ceremony at the local church. We got married in the spring of 1957 in a simple ceremony at the local church. My father gave us half of his savings he'd worked so hard to build up for, so we could buy our own little house. Benny, who was just 14 then, tall and handsome, was my groomsman. He looked like a young man in my father's borrowed suit that Aunt Clara had fixed up for him that day. Seeing the family gathered, My father got all emotional handing me over at the altar. And Benny smiled so proudly beside us. Me. Aunt Clara, who came special from Knoxville for the wedding. And Edward, waiting for me before the minister. I realized that my father's revenge was as perfect as it could be. His revenge was as perfect as it could be. Not the kind with blood or violence or destruction, but with life, with rebuilding, with love. He didn't just get us out of that hell my mother created. He built us a new heaven, piece by piece, day by day, with the same patience and determination he used for his constructions. My father's real revenge against everything my mother stood for was showing that kindness can be stronger than evil, that love builds while hate destroys, and that even after the worst storms, we can find the sun again. The years passed like pages turned by the wind. My black hair turned white. My smooth hands got wrinkles and calluses. Dreams became memories, and those memories became the fortress I built to shelter me in my old age. Life with Edward was a true blessing. We had 3 children. William, named after my father. Clara, to honor my dear aunt. And Daniel, who everyone calls Benny like my brother. We raised them with love, firmness, and mostly with the truth. The truth is, I never hid our family story from our children, told them when they were old enough to understand, without unnecessary details, but without lies that could grow into monsters bigger than the truth itself. Lies that could grow into monsters bigger than the truth. My father lived with us after he retired. We built a small room in the back with its own entrance for his privacy, but close enough to share meals, chats, joys, and sorrows in our daily life, with its own entrance for his privacy, but close enough to share meals, chats, joys, and sorrows in our daily life. He was a wonderful grandfather, patient and wise, teaching my children everything he knew about woodworking, building, fishing, and especially the value of honest work and family. My brother Benny became a teacher. He studied hard, making the most of the opportunities life in Columbus offered to get into college. Even coming from a simple family like ours, he was the first in our family to get a degree. A huge source of pride for my father, who cried like a child on his graduation day. Benny married a colleague from the school where he taught, a lovely woman named Lillian, and they had 2 children who were always the light in his eyes right up to today. The traumas from our childhood left scars on my brother, of course, and there were hard times, especially in his teenage years, when the nightmares came back fierce, when the anger over what happened seemed to burn him up inside. But with the support of family, with my father's unshakable love, and later his wife and children, he turned that pain into strength to help others. As a teacher, he paid special attention to kids showing signs of abuse or neglect, knowing how to spot those signs that others might miss, help others. My father passed away in 1982 at 76, peacefully in his sleep on that little bed in the back room. It was a serene departure that a man who'd carried so much burden deserved. At his funeral, I was struck by how many people came to say goodbye. Colleagues from the construction world, neighbors, church friends, even old clients from projects he'd managed years before, all with stories about how William Harris was fair, honest, hard-working, and always ready to help anyone in need. Your father was a good man, an elderly gentleman who'd worked with him on that first project, Columbus said. The kind you don't find anymore these days. I never heard him raise his voice to anyone, but I never saw anyone disrespect him either. Hearing those words, I truly understood the quiet greatness of my father, a man the town thought weak for not controlling his wife, for letting her carry on, but he had an inner strength few could comprehend, strength of a man who put his children's happiness above his own pride, who knew that real courage sometimes means enduring in silence, waiting for the right moment to act. As for my mother, for years I tried to bury the memories of her along with her body, tossed on the riverbank like disposable trash. I didn't want to think of her anymore, didn't want to recall her face, voice, the smell of cheap cigarettes and perfume she left in the air when she went out at night. But as I got older, with the wisdom that comes with age, I began to see that we can't erase parts of our history, no matter how painful. Vivian was a product of her times, of how she was raised, and maybe even traumas I never knew about. That doesn't excuse what she did. Nothing could justify the horror she inflicted on Benny, the betrayal of my father, her abandonment of motherhood. But over time, I learned to separate my hatred for her actions from the person herself. I can acknowledge her crimes without letting them poison me for decades more. In 1995, when I was 57, with grandchildren running around the house, I took a trip I'd put off for so long, back to Cedar Grove with my brother Benny. Our Aunt Clara had passed away a few years before. We didn't have any family left there, but we felt we needed to visit where it all began, to face the ghosts that might still haunt us. The town had changed so much. More paved streets, more brick houses, less red dust, more businesses. Our old house wasn't even there anymore. Instead, there was a small hardware store. The shed where Clarence used to live was gone too, replaced by a pharmacy. We went to the local cemetery, where we knew my mother was buried. It took a while to find the grave. A simple cross with no headstone, just the name and dates, almost worn away by time and neglect. I stood there staring at that patch of ground for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Are you still angry?" Benny asked suddenly, his voice low and respectful, like in a cemetery. "No," I answered after a pause. "I'm not angry. I feel pity. Pity that she never knew her grandchildren. Pity that she wasted the chance to have a family that loved her. Pity that she lived and died without ever understanding what really matters in this life." Benny nodded, his eyes welling up as he stared at that forgotten cross. "You know how I feel. Ellie grateful. Not to her, but to our father, to you, to Aunt Clara. Grateful that you didn't let what she did destroy me completely. That you saved me, Not just from the horror of that house, but from becoming a man full of hate, too broken to love or trust. We left the cemetery hand in hand, like we used to when we crossed the street as kids. Two survivors, two warriors carrying invisible scars, but learning to use those scars as strength, not weakness. Today, at 87, sitting on my rocking chair on the porch of this little colorful house I've built with so much love, I watch my great-grandchildren playing in the yard, feel a peace I never thought possible in those dark days of my childhood. Life takes so many turns. Fate has mysterious paths. What seems like an unbearable curse at one time can be the seed of unbreakable strength later. My father's quiet revenge, calculated from love, not hate, still bears fruit today. 3 generations on, it's in the smiles of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren growing up without fear, without toxic secrets, without the crushing weight of silence that protects monsters and stifles victims. It's in the strength I discovered inside myself that let me survive, love, and build a beautiful life despite it all. If this story has touched your heart in some way, leave a like so others can know. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because every message makes a connection. I don't feel alone sharing this burden. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales for more stories from women like me, who found strength where there seemed to be none. Life isn't always easy, my dears, but it's always, always worth living with the love, courage, and that quiet determination I learned from my father. We can turn even the worst pain into strength to move forward. This is Aunt Ellie, your storyteller, thanking you for listening to my story. May God bless each one of you, and may love and protection never be lacking for our children. The true treasures of Andre, Sotin, then Tenji, those who have followed me to this point, listening to the tale of an old lady who's seen more winters than most of you will live, know that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises. No matter how terrible the storm, there's always shelter. Sometimes in the arms of those we love, sometimes in the strength we didn't know we had inside us. If this story has touched your heart in some way, leave a like so others can know. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because every message makes a connection. I don't feel alone sharing this burden. And subscribe to Grandparents' Tales for more stories from women like me, who found strength where there seemed to be none. Life isn't always easy, my dears, but it's always, always worth living with the love, courage, and that quiet determination I learned from my father. We can turn even the worst pain into strength to move forward. This is Aunt Ellie, your storyteller, thanking you for listening to my story. May God bless each one of you, and may love and protection never be lacking for our children, the true treasures of our lives.